Leave your ego at the door and get ready to be raw. This is Strength to Overcome, where real men find their strength in weakness. All right, guys, welcome back to the Strength to Overcome podcast. I'm your co-host Ryan here with my man Matt, and we're excited to be back with you this week for episode 2. And Matt, how you doing, brother?
Absolutely good, mate. I'm, plugging through, and it's been a great week. Got a couple of things I'll share with that too, but definitely a really good week, and things are looking good.
Yeah, man. So since the first episode, we were able to get together, kind of reunite after 12, 13 years of not seeing each other. So that was cool to spend some time with you and get to kind of feel your energy down there. And I know we're both in sunny Florida, but you're in a little bit sunnier spot than me.
We had a great couple of days. It was far too short, and I do look forward to doing it again soon. So in the meantime, this is going to have to do.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated spending some time with you, and you've always been like a mentor to me, and that's just continued on throughout our talks when we were together. But I was really thinking about it over the last 24 hours since I got home, and it really is meant to be for us doing this together with the Strength to Overcome movement, the journey we're on. And it got me thinking, you told me you could feel that I was a little bit off and that I was fighting with some things emotionally and talked about some of those things in the episode last week. And it just occurred to me because I was expecting a little bit to come into your world and see you down a little bit. And it wasn't. It was almost like the opposite. And your spirits were high and are high, even though, like you shared last week, you're in a tough spot physically in a number of areas. And it just struck me, it occurred to me like we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, or we're actually in the same place. It's just I'm there emotionally and you're there physically right now, which it's it just kind of hit me out of the blue today. Wow, that's really where we are right now.
Well, yeah, it's cool vantage point that you've got. Obviously, after 13 years, there's a lot of emotions going through, catching up with a buddy that, we were pretty close back in the day, and we had some great times. And so we've got a lot to unpack, and I really do see that the jigsaw pieces come together for us to do this together. And hopefully, over the next few episodes, people will understand why we're doing this and get a more get a better understanding as to why we're laying the foundation of this sort of situation we find ourselves in, versus waiting a year or two and then sort of sharing, hey, this is how we got out of it. We're both down in different areas, but we're really driven to succeed and sort of share the journey out of that darkness.
And you've had some cool things happen to you since we filmed our first episode, right?
Yes, it's funny. I realized after the last episode was filmed that I failed to mention during my Ubering time, I actually went back to school and got my real estate license, which was a big deal. I went through the class with a few other people that didn't make it out the other side, and I was blessed enough to actually hang my license with a client of mine that I'd become really good friends with out here. And so, I'm working at her office, and I got some clients of mine from when I was training that wanted to move. And so they actually ended up finding a home with me, and we closed on that in January. So we were really blessed with that. And then just in the last couple of days, pretty much while I was hanging out with you, we got an offer on a home that's been, listed for quite a while, and it was just amazing. I really want to give thanks to the powers that be, and just really acknowledge how grateful I am, because the timing of being able to get some funds through that business venture is just unbelievable right now. We really need that, and to me, it just validates, hey, listen, you guys are doing something good, and I'm going to continue to fund it while you guys are pressing forward on doing something that's pretty tough. To be honest with you, there's not a lot of people that want to bare their soul and have someone film the journey, right? So
Yeah.
really grateful, and absolutely, thankful beyond words
Yeah,
for
man.
that to it's happening now. So
Yeah, it was cool to see it all unfold right in front of me there with the real estate deal and I think there's probably some bigger things to come on that front for you. So I'm pumped to see you
yeah,
attack that side of things. But
absolutely, we needed it.
Today we were really looking to dive into this last 10 years. It's been probably 12 or 13 since we really were together. But you and I both had some major life transitions happen kind of in that 2015 time range. I know that was the year that I left the golf business and left my job as a PGA professional was that summer of 2015, and I kind of transitioned into the fitness world at that time. But you were going through another transition during that period, or shortly thereafter, weren't you?
I was, and this is the story that really hasn't been told. I mean, obviously, that I moved because I'm in Florida, but you really don't know what happened and what went down. And yeah, not a lot of people do. Yeah, the timeline of 15 was an interesting time. I'd say from probably about 13, 14, really, the last couple of years, that between when we kind of, ended up going in different directions, through random circumstances, which we can talk about another time. But 13 and 14 were really tough on my marriage, and I really found myself, we found ourselves really drifting apart. I was really digging on some other things, and it drove a wedge between us, and that connection just slowly but surely got to the point where we were really kind of both just looking to maybe move on and start fresh. We've both been married at that point 15 years.
Now you're talking
Um,
about, let me say, you're talking about your previous marriage, right? Okay.
and so we got married in 2000. So, by this time we've been married 15 years. And I got married when I was, goodness, I was just 20, I think, or so. But, she was a year younger, so we were really young. We got married, and, we've moved back and forth between Virginia and Australia a couple of times. So there's a lot of back and forth and up and down and where we're going to live and what we're going to do type of sort of stuff. And, by the time 15 rolled around, we are actually, working at the gym together. It was our gym. 180 Fitness was our gym. But we had a trip planned to Israel, of all places. It was about a 2 week trip, and so we went on that trip, kind of like kind of like a last hurrah, or a kind of let's see if we can get along type of thing, you know. And so we went on that trip, and we had some great times, and made some lifelong friends out of it, to be honest with you. But really, when we got back, we kind of just fell back into that feeling of, what are we doing here? And I think that both of us had been raised in very strict religious circles where divorce was a taboo subject. It wasn't something that was accepted. And if you did get divorced, you're pretty much reserved to never marrying again, you know? And so there's a lot of pressure there to keep it going, which just fueled the fire of, well, we don't want to. And we're at the gym together. And so we did. We separated. I think that was shortly after that Israel trip in April
That
of
was April
15.
of 2015.
Yeah, April 2015. And so we did. We separated, and I won't speak to what she did, or not that it would be my business too, and not that I even really know. Um, but she went off and started her life again, and I started my life again, and so the odd portion of this story is that we still owned the gym together and trained our clients there, which was a really difficult dynamic, but that's what we had decided to, let's just figure it out. And so during that time of separation, I started another relationship. It was with a client of mine. And, for the first time in a long time, I kind of had that hope again, and that vigor of, there's a bright future. And, that's common, obviously, right? New relationship and some excitement there. But that kind of time was really difficult, really challenging, because we're at the gym together. I'm trying to start a new life and getting some momentum in a different direction, and she's doing her thing and running in different circles, you know. And so during that summer, it was really challenging because the guilt, and some people that are raised in certain, religious circles will understand what I'm saying when I say guilt. Different denominations have different levels of guilt, right? But it's funny because there was this overwhelming guilt that just kept waving over me that I needed to fight for my marriage. I needed to make it work, but I didn't want to, right? Um, it was such a difficult dynamic because I was excited about my future, things were going well, but I felt drawn to, what's the word, obligation to, make it work because if I get divorced, I can't get married again, or, you're damned forever type sort of stuff, right? Really, really tough stuff,
So even
and
though
that's,
y'all were separated at the time, summer of 15, you were still kind of having those feelings.
yeah, but just that guilt of, you've till death type thing, right? And so you've just got this cocktail of emotions you got rolling around. And so I got to the point where I had to break off that relationship that I had started, which was really difficult for a lot of reasons, right? And with this sense of obligation, you know, try and come up with a plan or a strategy where this marriage could still work, you know? And I think that through, I'm not going to go through every conversation, every detail, but, long story short, we got to the point where we said, all right, well, let's do this, let's try again, but we've got to do it somewhere else. We've got to start fresh. We've got to move on. And so over the course of the next couple of months, we tried to figure out what are we going to do. And so we ended up putting our profile on a house sitting and business sitting platform where people can find you and you can go in and look after someone's house that's empty for 6 months or a business that needs help or running. And we got a contract for a little village, a little fishing village in the west coast of Mexico, Barra de Navidad. And we were set to start in April the following year. And so we quickly realized that we had a home, we had a business, what are we going to do? So we sold the business. We left my house for sale with a client of mine who was a real estate agent and packed everything up into a couple of suitcases and left. That's how we exited uh, Roanoke, Virginia after me being there for that stage 14, 15 years.
What month was that when y'all left?
So we left in April the following year, so April of 16.
Okay. Yeah, so I was still kind of in the fitness world. We were getting ready to start our first gym. We were at Gold's and we were getting ready to kind of start the first with the CrossFit Unify Roanoke that we had created. So I had a lot going on at the time. So I know you and I weren't really in contact at that point.
Well, listen, I was in the trenches of
Yeah.
trying to start a new life and then trying to, you know, fire up the old one, with a dead battery type sort of situation, right? And so, by April of 2016, that was it. We were gone. And so we got to this fishing village and we were looking after a three villa complex for some Canadians that couldn't live there permanently. And so we went down there and took over the business for 6 months. And, we'd left behind everything, right? Of course, there's a lot of bitterness and resentment. And, here we are in a foreign place. No one speaks English. And, it was 120 degrees every day. I mean, just brutal, like the sort of heat that just saps you. You've just got absolutely no fuel or energy. So during that time, I decided that I was going to pour myself into this marriage. I was going to just try and leave the past behind, the relationship, the gym, Roanoke, the friendships, and just, tunnel vision, make the marriage work, right? And so I ended up doing a 2-year course in about 4 months to become a qualified pastor, which this many people know, right? Maybe less, to be honest with you. And so during that time, I was just pouring myself in, and all it really did was drive a bigger wedge. So we continued to do our thing down there for the longest time and try and figure it out. We had good days, bad days, but we planned on seeing it through. And so we got to a point where we had to figure out what was next, and we got onto that platform, and we actually got a contract for another 6 months in Ireland, of all places, right? Looking after a farm. And soon after that, we got another contract for Hawaii that was going to be the 6 months after that. And so we really set up the next 12 months traveling the world and running businesses and, kind of just using that situation to just reset, right? No distractions and
And you were
I
getting
got
paid to do this?
no, but I'm living on in Mexico. It was hot, but through Villa Complex on a canal, beautiful area, just spectacular, unbelievable. And so you pay for your own stuff, and of course down there it was cheap as chips, right? I mean, it was really inexpensive, and so you start to learn the language and you start to know the locals, and I had a blast. I just love being in that sort of environment. I mean, there's people living down there on dirt floors and don't have anything, and so it was just amazing where I was in a position financially, having sold the house that we could, do stuff because our dollar went so far against the peso. But we got these two gigs, lined up, and we got towards the end of the time down there, our 6 months, and I really didn't want to go back through Roanoke on the way back to Ireland for the next contract. Obviously, all of her family was there, and we weren't equipped with the right gear for Ireland. Mexico is kind of, like shorts and t-shirt, if that, right? And obviously, Northern Ireland on a farm, you got to be rugged up and you got to have the right gear. And we did have the right gear, having lived in Virginia. And so we agreed that she would head back early to reset, see her family, and I would stay in Mexico and see through the house set. And it was funny because I remember the day, we had a friend that we'd gotten to know, and I remember the day that she, packed up her stuff and got in the car and was driving. I was on top of one of the villas looking down the canal drive. And as she pulled away, I remember I took a photo. I've still got it. I took a photo, and I remember having this thought: I'm not going to see her again. We're done.
Even though things were okay at the time, I mean, things were going well down there?
They were going well in that there was no distractions. We had
Yeah.
no business. We had no relationships down there. The circle of friends that she was running with, and my circle that I'd gotten close with, like we just didn't have anyone pulling us in any other direction. And so that made it really tough because you didn't have any sounding boards. But at the same time, you're thinking, okay, well, we're rebuilding something here. After 15, 16 years of history, but we just couldn't get onto the same page. I think deep down we were both, during the separation, I think we had both moved on to a point where we wanted to explore different futures, right? Again, a lot of people that get married young will probably speak to this, but when you're that young, you grow up and things change. Your habits, your likes, what you're looking for in a partner and things like that. And so she had different futures set in her mind, and so did I. And so during that summer of separation, I think we both kind of experienced, okay, this is where I'd go as an adult. Well, not that we weren't adults when we got married, but more mature adult. These are the directions we might go in for a future that we wanted. So we just had this really challenging 6 months, and so she took off to get back to Virginia and reload everything. And it was that day that I really decided I was going to do a fast. And I'd done a lot of fasting prior to that. And by fast, I mean not eating anything, just drinking water. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do this fast and I'm going to fast my way into saving this marriage. And I'm going to then develop a concept around this where I get to help men that are struggling in marriages and situations where it seems dire. And I'm gonna learn through my, you know, qualification as a pastor. I'm gonna go down this path. I'm going to help guys save their marriages. And I'm going to develop a concept called strength to overcome. And so I started fasting. I believe I was about a weekend. So, 7 days, no food. I was continuing to play pickleball, which is where I learnt the sport down there. I was, getting around on just a bicycle. But I was about a weekend to fasting. And we'd had a couple of conversations on the phone, just trying to plan the logistics of flights and timing and such. And we just had a couple of knockdown dragouts. Just stuff that was just, it was almost like 6 months had just compressed itself into explosion. She'd gone back and I don't know what she's doing back there, but I'm, in Mexico and I'm fasting. So, just everything was heightened. And within that one or two conversations, it ended up that the contracts for, Ireland and then the 6 months away, the whole thing got cancelled. Shut it down. Over. Done.
You guys decided to cancel it?
That was it.
Yeah.
Done. Which meant that I'm in Mexico fasting to, save the marriage and move on from my gem, my relationship that I'd started, my friends, everyone in Roanoke was my life, right? Her family had become my family, right? So everything I was working on and striving for, fasting for, and digging my heels in on, just done. And so here I am. I mean, I've got like two suitcases, or like a backpack and a suitcase, in a fishing village, and I've got nowhere to go. And she's staying in Virginia. So the next morning I woke up and I had received an email. Our profile had received an email from a couple in Northern California asking if we would look after their dogs in their home while they went to Australia, of all places. Right? I think this is partly why I was picked, but of all places, Australia. And I reached out to my wife and I said, "Hey, listen, I understand what's going on here, but I've just been asked. We have just been asked to do this, sit in Northern California." And she, I guess I was looking for, something to tie us back and, hey, we're going to press on here. Excuse me. But instead of anything moving forward, it was no, you should take that because I'm not coming back. Well, in my situation, you can imagine I'm kind of not really knowing what to do here. So I accepted the contract and just let them know, hey, listen, my wife's tied up with another, commitment and she'll meet me at your place, once I get there. So the contract was done, it was all finalized, and I stayed in Mexico. I think I was there for, I think it was 19 days on my own with a contract ready to go about a month from then, but I had continued to fast.
Just you
So it
just
was,
decided not to eat?
I was, I just continued to fast. I'd always wanted to do a long one, and I'd done a lot of fasting prior, but at this point I'm on day 19. And so I'd continued to play pickleball every day for 3 hours. And those that play the game know that, 3 hours in 100-degree heat is, that's brutal. But I continued to do it. I continued to function. I continued to do everything without anybody knowing, really. I'm sure I started to, look differently, but continued to do everything and work on my bonsai trees. And I was just finding myself really drawn to driving. And yeah, again, you remember I was driven to have this strength to overcome concept. So I had to win. I had to complete the fast, had to save the marriage and win. And so I got to day 19. My contract there was up. We wrapped everything up, packed the place up, got it ready for the owners to come back in, got everything back into a backpack sort of suitcase type scenario. And I headed back to Huntington Beach, California. And I stayed with a good buddy of mine and continued to fast. I poured myself into prayer and meditation and doing all the right stuff, just believing that it was going to come around. I'd been given this concept. And so I was doing a lot of walking at the time to just stay active, right? I was sleeping in the bottom bunk with this 5-year-old above me. I mean, you knew me at the height of my powers. And, I don't say that like I'm a superhero, but you knew me when I had a gem. I was married. I was growing my business. I had employees, had a beautiful home on an acre. Things looked really good. I was super strong and just athletic. Everything was good. And here I am on the bottom of a bunk, entering my third week of fasting, trying to save a marriage that clearly didn't want to be saved by either party, but deep down I just knew that I could save it and fast my way through and have this testimony. So I was doing a lot of walking at the time and I just kept fasting. At that point my goal was 40 days. It's a very biblical concept. And even if you're not into the religious circles, that 40-day fast is like, it's a big, it's a number that's known by even those that don't get into that sort of religious side of things. But continued to fast, did what I could to stay active, and just got to the point where my feet just exploded. They blew up to balloons. You know, toes were all swollen, ankles were swollen. I now couldn't even walk. I'd lost so much weight that I was hard to move around. You know, at the end of each day, I was so fatigued that, you know, if I'd been downstairs, you know, my buddy and another friend of mine, you know, that we'd met in this Israel trip, of all places, right? I had gotten to the point where they would have to carry me up to my room because I couldn't get up the stairs. My feet had just exploded, swollen from walking on them too much. And so here I am, you know, getting carried around, feet swollen, continued to fast, and I got to the 40-day mark. And of course, at that point, I'd already signed the contract for the next place. And so I had about a 10-day window. And so anybody that's fasted or could even comprehend, if you don't come back from 40 days of no food and just water, and you don't do it right, well, that's what could kill you. So I had a strategy, I had a plan. You know, obviously you're introducing, you know, juices and broths, some soups and things like this, but I had a 10-day window before I was going to be back, you know, on the road. And so at that point, I got up to Northern California and started the house set. And of course, I'm sure that the people looked at the profile picture and then saw me at the front door and they're like, what the hell is this? Like,
You
you
probably
know,
looked completely different, right?
well, you know, I have a picture, then I'd posted it on Facebook, and not many people even maybe noticed, but you know, I think I was coming in around 112 on the scales there, and you know, at the time, I don't know how much I had weighed to start with because we didn't have scales there, but I would say, you know, in Mexico, but I'd say somewhere around 60 to 70 pounds,
Yeah, during that
and
40-day
so
fast.
yeah, and so I mean, you know, I'm 6'1", and you know, to be weighing in at that, it's like, you know, you could see ribs, you could see hips, bones, you know, muscle, I mean, bones sticking out of my face, you know, look like a POW. You know, my body was bruised from sleeping, you know, because there's no padding anymore, you know, so I had bruises everywhere. I was just, you know, beat to hell. So I get up to Northern California and I start this, this house set. And I started to have a lot of itching in my fingers and toes and my wrists and things. And got to the point where it was so bad, I went and saw, you know, a specialist, and I was diagnosed with scabies. Like, you got to be kidding me. So here I am in Northern California. You know, marriage is completely crapped itself. I'm gonna, you know, I've done my fast. Like, what is going on here? Now I'm battling this, and so you know, I was 10 days in or a couple of weeks in, you know, to the recovery at that point, and so you know, I didn't want to pour all the toxic poison of the solution all over my body. Right, I'm coming back from the fast. I don't want the first things that I pour into it to be, you know, medication. And so I tried to work on it naturally. And so I did what I could and I kept trying. I think I was probably, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 weeks into the recovery, and I decided to do another fast. This time I did no food, no water. And I did that for about 3 or 4 days. And during that 3 or 4 days of no food, no water, I joined a gym and I was working out twice a day. I was using the sauna. Then I'd get in the pool and I'd get back in the sauna. I was just trying to sweat this, you know, disgusting disease that I had, you know, gotten obviously in Mexico. And I did that 3 or 4 days and, you know, that didn't work. So then I started to develop some concoctions, some really natural, heavy duty, you know, concoctions to try and kill it off. And so I was taking these baths and it wasn't working. So I, you know, I made this really strong bath and tea tree oil and all sorts of really heavy duty stuff. And I soaked in it to my neck down, you know, hands are in, knees are in, feet are in. I soaked in it for like half an hour. I'm like, I was so upset, so mad, so ready to just be done with life in general. And so I did this major soak and I burnt myself so badly. It worked, but I burnt myself. So now I'm in this situation of trying to recover from a fast, going through a divorce, burnt myself to a crisp from the neck down. I had to wear long sleeve clothing so people wouldn't see it, and it's just weird, you know. My skin had just rashed, and started to fester. It was just a mess. It was like I had leprosy or something. At the same time, I was looking after these dogs. One of them was sick, and so I was in and out of the veterinarian and trying to get in touch with the owners. The dog was getting worse. Fortunately, I was still in touch with my buddy from Huntington Beach. We touched base every day. I think he thought deep down, he was like, "Oh, I don't touch base with him. He's just going to off himself, right?" And so he touched base with me every day, and we petitioned and prayed and just worked towards resolution. We didn't know what that resolution meant at the time, but we just kept pressing in. I had another buddy from Virginia that I'd stayed in touch with, and I'd trained this kid since he was 13, and he was going through a rough time, very similar to mine. And he came out for a week, and it was just a shot in the arm that I needed, some momentum. We had a great week, but of course, at the end of the week, he went back and I was on my own again. And of course, then there's a wave of emotion. Here I am all alone again. I was trying to heal. I was trying to bounce back from the fast. I was looking after this sick dog. Still trying to work on the marriage. We just crossed over into January at this point, and that was 17 years. So I, put together this elaborate anniversary, gift and idea, and sent it off, and kind of fell on deaf ears. Just didn't feel right, I guess. And so, you know, nothing really transpired from that. Meanwhile, the owners are gone, so they don't really care if someone's coming or not, as long as their dogs are being looked after, right? So I continued to, bounce back, hit the gym, work on all that I could. I was having night sweats at the time, which I don't know if you've ever experienced night sweats.
Not really.
Basically, you wake up in the middle of the night or the next morning and everything is saturated as if someone had come in and hosed you down. Like your pillow, your bed, your sheets, the comforter, everything. Absolutely dripping wet. And that started to happen, and I was going through that every single night, which means every single day I'm doing a full load of laundry. And I didn't have a lot of strength at this point, so I was struggling with that. And it was just a lot to handle, on my own. I was trying to work out, but I was fatigued, so I couldn't get back to my heights. So just really struggling on every front. You start to think, well, that's it, that's over, right? And so I remember the day I got the mail, and I got this envelope from clients of mine from the gym that I had known for a long, long time, good friends, and they're lawyers. So I opened it up, and it was the divorce papers. So I took the divorce papers to the UPS to, sign and have someone notarize. And that's how I did it. Signed them, mailed them off. Like, okay, well, I'm divorced. Same timeline, the dog continued to get worse. And it was towards the end of my stay, and the dog died.
While you were house sitting.
While I'm looking after these two dogs, the dog, it continued to get worse, and it had treatment, and I'd been in and out of the dog hospital, and the dog dies. I'm literally sitting there, and this dog's dying in my arms, type sort of scenario. I'm like, what in the world? What's the point? I mean, I don't know how many times in that 6 months I could have just slipped into the bath and said that was done, or driven off the edge of a bridge. I mean, you just really start to think, what is the point? And I know a lot of people have sort of thought about it, but when you start thinking about, how you're going to do it and stuff, you really kind of scare yourself. You're like, wow, so what would happen if I did? And at that point, I had no business, I had no home, I had no relationships, a couple of friendships. I'd lost my home city in the divorce, essentially.
Yeah, because she was back in Roanoke and you were across the country.
Yeah, I mean, I can't go back to Roanoke, and really got nothing. Now I'm down to a backpack type scenario. So I wrapped up my time there, and I went back to Huntington Beach for a couple of days, and then flew home to Australia. I'm like, I got to get around people that love me unconditionally, no matter what. Not that anyone, Huntington Beach didn't, but family is a whole nother level, right? And so I went home to Australia, and of course I spent about a month there. My family in Brisbane, wanted me to come up there. So I went up there for a little time, and I spent some time with both, Melbourne and Brisbane family members. And of course they all pitched, this is just stay here, right? You're already home. There's nothing back there, right? For whatever reason, I decided I was going to come back to um, California. I didn't know why. I just decided I was going to do that. So I went back to Huntington Beach, California. and I started getting into a little bit of carpentry work. I wasn't ready to get back into the training scene. Just too much, just too many emotions attached to that scene. And so I decided to get back into the carpentry thing, and it kind of started to pick up. I got some work, and I was staying with my buddy again, and woke up one day, and I just felt impressed to buy a ticket back to Virginia. So I did. I bought a ticket. I got on a plane. I think even that hour, I think it was the afternoon of, and I went back to Virginia. And I stayed with my buddy that had come out for a week, and he was renovating his house. So I, dug in and helped him renovate his home and did some work there for him while he was busy working. And he was still going through some tough times, but coming out the other side, right? So it was a real opportunity for us to spend some time together. And it was during that time being there that I felt impressed and needed some closure on the relationship that I had walked away from 2 years prior. I'd basically just disappeared for 2 years. And so I just needed to know and talk some stuff out with her and just trying to figure out, just share some stuff. It hadn't gone down very well, and, it was really kind of sad and heartbreaking at the time. And so it had been 2 years, and, I'd been alone on my own at that point, since the prior year. So I thought I was in a good position to just sort of reach out and say, hey, listen, I'm in town, I just want to let you know in case we run into each other. And you got to understand at this point, I didn't know if she was even in town. I hadn't, at that point, I wasn't on any social media. I didn't really know, I wouldn't have any idea how to track it. It wasn't in touch with anybody that would know. And so I just kind of thought, well, she could be married. She could be, could be pregnant, could already had a kid. I'm like, what can happen in 2 years? We know that, right? Things can happen quickly. Hell, I didn't even know if she was in the same place, same town. But I got a text back. I think it said, I'm almost speechless, I think was the reply. Because
Really?
essentially I was dead. I was gone. I just disappeared off the face of the earth. And I'm sure whisperings had got around that I'd moved to Mexico and was living in some small fishing village type sort of scenario. Right? Like, he's gone. And so, we texted a couple of things back and forth, and I just asked if it would be okay for us to meet. And of course, again, you got to remember at this point, I didn't know if there was a husband on the other, side of that couch, you know. And so we agreed to meet, and I remember we agreed to meet and just go for a walk somewhere very neutral. And of course, I had recovered from the fast, but didn't look the same. It was a different look, you know. It had been at that point, I don't 7, 8 months, but you know how long it takes, right? 60, 70 pounds is a lot. And it was a different look, right? So of course, I didn't look the same, probably didn't sound the same, probably just a different type of personality altogether. And so, I just needed to have that conversation and just share, hey, what's been going on? How you doing? What's happened in the last 2 years? And this is what I've been through, and this is what's kind of going on. I wanted to sort of share that and have that closure.
Was she open to it?
Yeah, we did that. We got together, and it was, of course it was awkward, but it was interesting to, show up. And, of course my mind is, I don't, you know, I don't want to get in on something and find she's married with kids and stuff. So of course, you ask that fairly early, like, hey, listen, this isn't kind of right if, something like that's going on. And so she, shared with me that she had, recently lost her grandmother, who she was, incredibly close with, and had, moved into an apartment downtown and was, on her own and was doing, great things in her career and, working her way up to the top in this business that she was with. Things were going great for her, right? Um, so we stayed in touch. I think we might have got together another time or so, but I had committed already going back to California, and I had some jobs that I'd already committed to. So I went back to California, and we continued to stay in touch and text and FaceTime and such. And so got to the point where I said, "Listen, I'm tied up with a lot of work out here. Why don't you come out?" Right? And so she agreed to come out to California, and so she came out to California, and we spent a few days or a week together, whatever it was. We were staying with my buddy and just exploring, the what ifs at this point. You know. And so we got to the end of that time. And of course, it was time for her to go back to, you know, Virginia. So she did. She went back to Virginia, and I stayed in California. I said, listen, we continued to stay in touch. I said, listen, I'm not looking to move back to Virginia. I've got roots that I'm starting to put down here in California. I just don't think I can come back there at this point. For me to start again, I just need to be out of there. And I think a lot of people might understand that. I'd been gone at that point a long time. And, it was her town. She grew up there. It was her family. It was her friends. I had entered into, you know, my ex-wife's world at that point. And so it just didn't feel right for me to kind of try and barge my way back in, you know? And I didn't think I wanted to either. Although I did have visions of, going back to 180 and getting back into training and just, getting on with my life. But obviously I didn't do that. And so I was in California and she stayed in Virginia. And we continued to stay in touch and FaceTime after her visit out there. And, things were able to kind of pick up pace simply because of the history there. And so it was a little easier to sort of see what sort of a future there could be. So we got to a point where I said, listen, again, that religious mindset in me is like, listen, if we're going to do this, I got to commit. And, people that know me as, all in, right? Kind of like the 40-day fast kind of thing. Like, it's like, he's got no throttle. He's just, he's either on or, 8,000 RPM. And so I planned a proposal and I flew back to Virginia. I didn't tell her, flew back to Virginia, got the code for her apartment off of her friend, and I snuck in and I laid out this proposal, you know, on her kitchen table and then left. And so that's how I proposed. And of course, she gets home and she's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, kind of, I can't even put it into words because it's not my story to tell, right? But of course, my phone rings. Like, where are you? What? And I didn't have a car. I'd flown in. I was just doing everything off a foot. I had a backpack again. Here I am with a backpack. I was like Dupree, right? You remember that movie, You Man
Yeah.
Dupree? Even my family in Australia started calling me Dupree, right? They'd put me in their phone as Dupree because I looked bad. My hair was a mess. I'd lost weight. I was just living on kids' bunk beds and floors. And so here I am downtown Roanoke getting this phone call like, where are you? What's going on? Are you here? Like, what, how did you do this type of thing? And so, of course, I went round the, back streets and, got there and, knocked on the door type sort of scenario. Like, I'm here. We're going to do this type thing. And so in the blink of an eye, we went from, you know, a whole career that she was about to just, hit new heights on and had a new place downtown. And here I am ruining the whole process. And so she had to, get out of her lease because I said, listen, if we're going to do this, it's got to be in California. I'm kind of, crunching this all down here into a matter of, sentences versus days or weeks. But the decision was made to load everything up into a, 30-foot U-Haul and hook it back to California and start life again. So we did that. A friend of
Wow.
hers came with us. We jammed it up. I've got photos of furniture and beds and all sorts of stuff in the streets, downtown Roanoke in the streets as I packed everything in and it didn't fit, so I had to pull half of it out again and it was just fantastic. And the irony was just unbelievable because right next door to where she had her apartment, there was this function and it was this lawyer convention. And I'm literally got this 30-foot U-Haul and I'm loading this crap in it while these lawyers and professionals and clients from the past are literally walking past. And of course, they're not thinking like, Matt's been gone for a couple of years, right? So they're not looking for you, you know? So I'm in and out of this truck loading this thing and I'm seeing people that I know, but they're not seeing me kind of thing, right? And so we did. We loaded it up. We drove across the country. We started life again in Huntington Beach, California, and and we got married on the beach the following May, 2018. And it was a roller coaster because there's so much baggage that you don't understand what you're carrying with you, and so it was just the highs were high, the lows were still low, but she'd made that commitment to me, and it was a really tough transition for her, leaving her mum, her friends, her career, everything for me,
Yeah.
just a really tough time. And I'm like, well, I did it to myself. We plugged through, and I ended up getting back into the fitness industry, and had a great career with Crunch while I was out there, but didn't share the story. I couldn't. It was still too raw. Everything was still too fresh. And so I had this career out there, and I got into management, pretty quickly. Obviously having my own gym for nearly 10 years, I had a lot of experience, and being in the business for, nearly 20 or 8, 15 at the time, whatever. But the position was a lot of sales, and I struggled with the rejection. I'd still had so much baggage and so much heartache, and obviously you can't process it all in such a short window. Even though I'd been on my own for a long time and gone for 2 years, I've just got married again. I'm starting fresh. There's a lot of hope about what the future holds, and I learned to overcome rejection through the sales management role that I had, and it was just, I look back on it now, and it's like, wow, really, that was the right position, because day in, day out, I was getting no's and rejections, and I'd struggled with that my whole life, and it was almost like that position was meant to be for me, although it was incredibly hard at the time. I just needed to face, no after no after rejection. And I ended up breaking records out there. I had a great career, and things were going really, really well. And we got pregnant. We tried to stay out there, but financially we just couldn't at the time, even though we were both, professionals and making good money. Well, like we just couldn't afford it. So we bought a house sight unseen before it was cool for everyone else to do it. And December of 19, we had our firstborn, and we named her Callie, appropriate for California, right? So
Yeah.
called her Callie, who you met
Yeah.
uh, this
I
week,
recall.
and full of energy, right? Typical Morton. And so about 18 months later or so, we had another one, Chloe, who you met, Coco.
Oh, yeah.
And, we've been in Bradenton, Florida now for 5 years, and the marriage is still tough. And I don't think it's news to anybody that marriage can be tough when you've got two kids, that close in age. She had a whole career she was going to do, and just a lot, right? Just a lot in the last 5 years. So here we are, and I feel like moving forward, wanted strength to overcome to exist, but I needed to share where it came from. And although you could look back and say, well, you failed, right? And so that was my mindset for a lot of years. You failed. You can't do strength to overcome. You fasted. You did everything right. You knuckled down. You stayed focused. You gave it shot after shot after shot, and it didn't work. And so they were the voices in my head that said you can't do strength to overcome. But it took this long for me to realize that in the end, I got a beautiful wife whom I'm now learning to love unconditionally. Right? That's the walk that I'm on now. Right? Unconditional love and gratitude for her being such an amazing mum and giving me the family that I wanted the whole time. I had wanted a family. I'd wanted to be a dad, and it looked like it was done. I wasn't going to have it. I was my late 30s, destitute, had nothing, no career, no business, no anything. And it just didn't look good. Been through a divorce, all that baggage, and it just didn't look like I was ever even going to have a relationship again, let alone have kids. And so you have to look at this and say, you know what? I continued to overcome, even though I didn't necessarily achieve the original intent of the fast and the concept of strength to overcome. I've overcome in a lot of other ways. And so for me, it's just important to lay that foundation for a lot of people out there that, when you set your goals on something and you fall short, that doesn't mean you failed, right? You've got to press on. You've got to keep going. And if I hadn't kept going, if I hadn't reached out, or if I hadn't have just tried to get back on the horse, I honestly think I'd still be single. I don't think I would have found someone. She's a one in a million. She's put up with a lot of emotional roller coasters with me, and she stuck by me through, all the thick, all the thin, all the ups, the downs. And, we raised these two kids with a very similar mindset, and I'm blessed. I'm so thankful, and I give credit to the Almighty because there was a time during my stay in Northern California, I'd done a lot of blood work, and I sent it off to a doctor in Florida at the time. And he called me with the results. He was about 80. He was a legend, and I found him. And he called me at the time and introduced himself. And his opening line to me, I'll never forget it, was, "We have your results in. Do you want to live?"
You want to live.
And I'm like, you know, what does that even mean? You start looking through your email, like, what are the results? What's happened? Type of thing. And this doctor, who's passed now, he's passed away, and at the time he kind of turned my vantage point around of the divorce. And he spent about 20 minutes going through how I needed to start living, not about what I needed to start eating and my blood work this and my blood work that. Even though I told him about the fast, he's just like, that's irrelevant. You need to listen to what I've got to say. And he spent about 20 minutes with me, which just blew my mind. And he shared with me so much motivation to press on through the divorce. It gave me hope at the time. He gave me hope to try again, which is essentially, I think, what motivated me to reach out to Heather in the first place. After 2 years of complete silence, right? He gave me that motivation and said, "Listen, you got to press on. You can't get stuck there. That doesn't define you, you know."
So why did he say, "Do you want to live?" based on your blood work?
Yep. But he didn't take the angle of these are your deficiencies. He had opened, and it blows my mind to this day that he opened with that because he didn't know my story at all. But after I'd shared it, he didn't diagnose and treat me and send me pills and potions and such. He spent 20 minutes just sharing with me what I needed to do to press on. And it just blew my brain. We got to the end of the conversation, and I still remember it. And he said, "Repeat after me." He said, "I am a son of the Almighty. No harm can come unto me." I repeated it. "I am a son of the Almighty. No harm can come unto me." And he hung up. That was it. And so it was that conversation that I carried with me through my time in Northern California. And he motivated me, and I still remember it to this day, obviously. Powerful. And it's what I needed at the time. So, when I look back on these moments that happened and everything that was meant to be, here I am with these two beautiful kids. And, listen, I'm down and out physically, but I see an incredibly bright future, and strength to overcome for me is something that I'm so passionate about now, more than I think I ever would be, because had I achieved my original goal, it would have been done out of obligation, whereas now it gets to be done out of, a passion to help others overcome when they think they may have failed.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
that's huge. That's powerful, man. I think a lot of people will resonate because they've been through those tough times, the divorce and feeling like they're completely alone and isolated. And I'm sure people have moved away from friends, family, and that sort of thing as well. So they're gonna kind of feel where you're coming from on that front for sure. What do you think the lowest time was? What was the absolute lowest? Was it when you were 112 pounds?
when I was 112 and I couldn't walk and I'm being carried upstairs by these strong men, just the humility to do that was significant. But honestly, I think it was when I'd burnt myself trying to heal myself naturally and trying to rebuild. I was in Northern California, didn't have any friends, knew a few people from an Israel trip, but I had felt at the time that my ex-wife had gotten them in the divorce too, so I felt a little bit challenged on sharing too much with them, that I had met them. They're about half an hour away. Of all places I could have been posted in the world, I was close to them and they were really good to me. But it was a struggle for me to share too much because they had really clicked with my ex-wife. And so it was a really difficult dynamic. But I remember burning myself, and I honestly was really, I mean, I didn't, so you kind of know how it worked. But I really just thought, just slide into the bath, and just finish it here, just drown yourself. Like this is you burn because you got to remember after I'd burnt myself, the next month I had to bathe in these ointments and special baths to try and heal myself. And the wounds and the stuff on my flesh, it was just I had no strength, I had no energy, I had no motivation, I had no one, I had nothing, and my body was completely destroyed. It was pretty
Yeah, how do
bad.
you, I mean, how do you come back from that? You know, because I think that's where a lot of people are.
I think that's why I like to share that story of the doctor that called and just I know for sure that he was moved to call me personally and go over my results, but he didn't approach it from the medical standpoint. And there's just no way he could have known to do that had there not been some divine intervention for him to call and just say the things that he did. And because at the time, you got to understand, I had failed. My marriage had failed. And so I had reserved myself to, that's it. I have to be single the rest of my life. I can't marry again. I can't find happiness. I can never have a family. I can never be a dad. And he gave me the hope to press on. It was the most bizarre 20-minute conversation I've ever had because it didn't make any sense. I'd never met the man. All he had was results in front of him. He didn't know my story. And I just think that there were people littered through my story. My buddy in California, um, who I would love to have on the show, not to tell my story, but to tell his of his life. But I'm gonna try and get him on the show. He checked in on me every day. He actually came up to Northern California twice with his wife and kids, and stayed there and just checked in on me every day. And I was there during the last half of my fast. I was there before I went to Australia. I was there when I went back from Australia. I was there when I went back from, Virginia. I mean, just over and over. He was a rock of just unbelievable magnitude. I wouldn't have made it through without him, for sure. And to me, that's why the strength to overcome is so powerful with the two now. It's like I would definitely have not made it without him and my buddy in Roanoke at the time, who I also touch base with almost daily. Without those two guys, I would not have made it. There's no doubt. I would have just, had a weak moment and done something stupid.
Speaks to the power of having people in your life to lift you up when you're down.
Yeah, and I think that, starting that relationship again when the the upbringing and all the baggage of religion that can sometimes tie you down. I think had I listened to that, I would not have reached out. And I live a certain way. A lot of people know I chase a lot of rabbit holes, and I live a certain lifestyle that doesn't always agree with a lot of people. And so to find someone that wants to be a part of that is just one in 100 million, right? There's just not many people out there, and to be able to have two amazing little girls is just, I'm blessed with her as my wife, and I have certainly made it difficult for her in a lot of ways. And I'm working really hard, even now. Things don't look great, but she's stuck by me so far, and I believe she'll stick with me till the end. And of course, my commitment to her is to stick through to the end, right? I'm not doing this again. I can promise you that.
That's powerful, man. Yeah, so I guess the moral of the story is, guys, when you're down and you think it can't get any worse, and it might get a little bit worse, there's always a way up. There's always a way to overcome because the world works in mysterious ways for sure.
Absolutely. And moving forward, want to be able to share that and lean on that to help others. And of course, I know you got a lot you got going through, and we had an amazing 24 hours together, and we've got a lot to work through together. And I just think that a year from now, if we keep pressing on and keep pushing, I think there's gonna be a lot of lives that we've been able to help get through, which just excites me more than anything. And I believe that the provision will come for us to be able to continue to do this, whether it be through something we come up with or, some help along the way. We don't know yet, but I truly believe that the timing is right for this, and really excited to be doing it with you more than anything. Because although you weren't there during that time in my life, the timing is right for you to be there now, you know, and you're about to embark on becoming a dad. And, I'm going to give you all that I can to help you through that challenging time and transition for you. So excited to be on the journey with you, brother.
Yep, pumped for the upcoming weeks, guys. If you like this, go ahead and like, subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, wherever your favorite places are to watch, and share with a friend. If you've got somebody in your life you know that might get some comfort from the stories we're telling and that we're going to tell in the coming weeks, share this podcast and let's grow this thing together.
Absolutely, Ryan. I appreciate it, and thanks for hearing my story after 13 years. So, to everybody out there, stay strong. You are not alone.
And we'll catch you next Friday.
Absolutely.